The LG V30. Those are some slim bezels. The corners of the display are curved, and unlike the G6, these are smooth and pleasing to look at. The bottom bezel is super slim, clean, and logoless. Two cameras, one normal, one with a wide-angle lens. LG is making a big deal about the f1.6 aperture. The bottom of the back just has an LG logo. The bottom has the usual mic, USB port, and speaker. Another 6 months, another LG flagship phone. Typically the V series has been LG's wacky, experimental line with an extra ticker screen on the front. This year, though, the V30 is all business. The ticker is gone in exchange for a slim bezel device and a clean look. With the V30, LG is still basically following the same path that Samsung travels by shipping a heavily skinned phone with a glass back and slow updates. When you do all the same things as Samsung without the marketing budget, it's hard to stand out. Specs at a glance: LG V30 screen 2880 x 1446.0 538 pixels per inch, LG Pult 189 aspect ratio, OS Android 7.1, Nougat CPU 8-core Qualcomm Snapdragon 835 for 2.35 GHz Cairo 280 performance cores and 41.90 GHz Cairo 280 efficiency cores, RAM 4 GB, GPU Adreno 540, storage 64 GB, networking 802.11 BGNAC, Bluetooth 5.0, GPS, NFC bands, ports USB 3.0, Type-C 3.5mm headphone jack, camera dual 16MP rear cameras, 13MP front camera, size 151.7 by 75.4 by 7.4mm, 5.97 by 2.97 by 0.29 in weight, 158 grams, 5.57 ounces, battery 3300 mAh, starting price $800, other perks: NFC, quick charging, fingerprint sensor, notification LED, design and build quality. LG did a lot right with the V30 hardware. It has the best front design we've seen this year, with super slim bezels that rival the Galaxy S8 and a simple, no-nonsense symmetrical design. There are no logos to distract from the screen, and the only blemishes are an earpiece and a front-facing camera. So far, the V30 is the ultimate expression of the slim bezel, symmetrical smartphone design. The front of the V30 is beautiful in person, and everyone who sees it usually lets out a nice or some other comment when the screen turns on. LG hit most of the items you'd want on the hardware checklist, too. You get a headphone jack, a micro SD card, and IP68 dust and water ingress protection. That headphone jack also sounds pretty good, since it's powered by a higher quality DAC than normal, which LG brands with the complete nonsense phrase quad DAC. You even get a few equalizer presets. The back is glass, which is a disappointment. It makes the phone more fragile than it needs to be, plus, it makes for a smudgy fingerprint magnet, just so LG can have an easier time routing the signals in and out of the device. With the entire front and back being glass, you'd imagine the V30 would not survive a drop very well. A tiny crosshatch pattern is carved into the colored panel under the glass, making the back look a bit like a lenticular hologram. The glass back at least enables wireless charging, which is built into the device. The V30 supports fast wireless charging through the Qi and PMA wireless standards. Here, fast is described as going from 0 to 50% battery in 55 minutes. The phone also supports Qualcomm Quick Charge 3.0 and USB PD, which are both much faster. You'll go from 0 to 50 in 35 minutes. On the back, you get LG's typical setup, a combination clicky power button and fingerprint reader, along with a dual-lens camera system. The fingerprint reader feels a bit small, but it works great and lives in an easy-to-reach location. For the camera, you have two 16MP sensors, and the extra one has a wide-angle lens. The cameras are almost flush with the body, but, they're not quite flush with the body. They stick out just a bit. Enlarged, that's the LCD-equipped LG G6 on the left, and the V30 on the right, both showing a solid gray image. The photo processing here aims to exaggerate the clarity difference for the camera. In reality, the effect is more subtle. Like the Pixel 2 XL, the V30 uses an LG OLED display panel. Also, like the Pixel 2 XL, this is a subpar panel that won't compare to the Samsung OLEDs smartphones are often equipped with. Between the pre-release V30, Pixel 2 XL, and this final V30, I've seen 3 of these LG panels so far, and they all have the same issues. My biggest issue with the Pixel 2 XL display is still here at low brightness. The display is grainy and dirty looking. The screen is constantly cluttered with lines and artifacts, but this happens most noticeably on low brightness. Both V30s I've tried have had a second issue, though uneven lighting. A solid color on the V30 ends up looking like a gradient because the bottom of the display is just brighter than the top. LG's OLED panels aren't a deal breaker, it's something you can learn to live with and ignore, but they're disappointing given that most other flagship phones have beautiful, mostly flawless screens. Like with most other slim bezel phones released this year, you get a super tall 189 screen, inflating the diagonal screen measurement to 6.0 inches. In reality, the phone is only as wide as a 5.5-inch phone from last year, but that is a great size. The glass on the front and back of the V30 is rounded slightly on the edges, which blends well into the rounded metal sides. If you must have a glass-backed phone, the LG's hardware is solid. It's disappointing that the display is subpar, but you can learn to live with it. In exchange you get a super slim bezel design, an SD card, and a headphone jack. The closest competing hardware to this is, of course, the Galaxy S8, and I'd gladly take the V30's display over the S8's impossible touch fingerprint scanner any day. The software. Let's play a game. Does LG's software look more like Android or iOS? Here's the home screen. The software is the biggest downside to the V30. First, it ships with an old version of Android 7.1 Nougat, and second, it's skinned to look like a counterfeit iOS device. Android standard app drawer is gone. Instead, just as in iOS, every app icon gets dumped onto the home screen. The default layout of my LG V30 spreads 50 app icons across 2 screens and 4 folders, and some of the folders have pages. Finding anything is a challenge. The whole home screen is a mess, but this is easily fixed by installing a third-party launcher, which can restore the normal app drawer and app search. Such a strategy will allow you to treat the desktop like a favorite apps list and not a dumping ground for everything. In addition to the iOS-style home screen layout, the icons all look like iOS 2, with rounded square backgrounds applied to every app. The folders use an iOS-style full screen display rather than Android's in-place folder pop-up, and the settings are reskinned to look as much like iOS as possible. Why would you ever want your Android phone software to look like a knockoff of iOS? It's totally fine if an OEM doesn't have a visionary software design direction, but in that case, just leave everything alone so it looks like a normal Android phone. Copy iOS is not a design direction. This is an $800 device, and the copycat software design cheapens the entire feel of the phone. LG's skinned design also clashes with the rest of the Android ecosystem. LG can only skin the OS and the included LG apps, so these all follow LG's design style. LG can't skin the Google apps, though, and those all follow Google's design philosophy, called material design. Google has made material design easy for third-party developers to implement with comprehensive design guidelines and code samples, so most of the third-party ecosystem follows material design, too. This leads to an aesthetic rift when you use a skinned Android phone. The OS and packed-in OEM apps follow one design style, while Google's apps and all other apps follow a different design style. The result is a messy, sometimes confusing mix of competing design philosophies. LG's user experience would be much better if it followed material design, just like most others on Android. The lock screen, home screen, and folder interfaces, recent apps, the notification panel, and quick settings are all here. There's a few extra buttons and a new coat of paint, but the functionality is all here. Here's the settings and the home screen again, but this time I dug into the settings and turned on the app drawer. It's a bit more normal now. The good news is that LG didn't break anything. Android's important, irreplaceable interfaces, the lock screen, notification panel, recent apps, and settings, are still usable, albeit a bit uglier than usual. Like with most skinned phones, I'd advise you to replace as much as you can through the Play Store, most importantly the home screen and keyboard. One interesting oddity is that on my apt version, at least Firefox is the default browser. Chrome comes pre-installed, but unless you dig through the settings, Firefox will be the default browser for links opened from apps. On a desktop OS, default browser shenanigans are a normal thing, and every browser will detect if it is the default on startup and offer to change the setting for you. There is no default browser detection on Android, though, and if you open Chrome, it won't offer to make itself the default. This makes changing the default browser difficult, since you have to find it in the settings. Searching for default browser in the settings won't bring you to the right screen. You need to know it's in Settings, Apps, Menu, Configure Apps, Browser App. Phew, why does LG even bother with this software package? There isn't a single thing here that is an improvement over the stock Android that LG started with. It's a wonder that companies burn through resources to create something like this. LG's skin offers no value to the end user, it fragments the user interface, it creates more work for LG, and it makes updates harder. Maybe the whole project makes some LG executive feel better because now LG's software doesn't look like everyone else's software. The problem is, it looks worse. Listing image by Ron Amadeo. Page 2. Shipping with an old version of Android to start with is not a good sign, but let's look at LG's history to see what kind of support we can expect for the V30. Its predecessors, the LG V20 and LG G6, both launched with Android 7.0, and since few phones have been updated to Android 8.0 yet, those phones don't provide useful data points. The LG G5 is our best bet. It launched in 2016 with Android 6.0 and was eventually upgraded to 7.0. LG often likes to release updates first in Korea, and there the G5 was upgraded to Android 7.0 Nougat in November 2016. Android 7.0 released in August 2016, so this is about a 3-month delay. This release was in Korea only, though, so that doesn't cover the vast majority of our readers. Shout out to those of you reading in Korea, though. In the US, LG slavishly lets the cell carriers do whatever they want to its phones to the point where the company doesn't even announce pricing or release dates at its own launch events. The release date of an LG update is going to change depending on your carrier. Sprint and T-Mobile were first out of the gate with the Nougat update for the G5 in November, a 3-month delay. Verizon came in December, 4 months after Nougat release, and that took until February, 6 months. Apparently the worst thing you can do is buy the phone direct from LG. The unlocked US version received Nougat in May 2017, a whopping 10 months after the first release of Nougat, and 7 months after the first release of LG's Nougat build. 3 to 10 months for an update, depending on your carrier setup, is not great. Considering Google's breakneck pace of Android releases, an LG phone never has an up-to-date version of Android. You can expect to always be at least one version behind the latest Android release. Currently, LG is beta testing an Android 8.0 Oreo release in Korea. LG plans to make the release final in December, at which point Oreo would be about 4 months old. It sounds like the G5 schedule outlined above is still holding true. LG does at least develop monthly security updates. The company maintains a security bulletin page, and every month seems to rev up a new build of Android which fixes the latest Google-discovered vulnerabilities. The V30 is part of this monthly security program, but whether you actually get these updates is another story. LG's own page says that, depending on regions and carriers, updates may be released monthly, quarterly, or irregularly. Basically, it's totally up to your carrier whether or not you get a security update. For my unit, which is sitting on the September security patch in November, I'm guessing it'll get quarterly releases. Sidestepping carrier interference and using the unlocked version would seem preferable, but remember LG provided very poor update support for the unlocked G5. Performance: there's nothing too noteworthy about the V30's performance. The V30 is packing a Snapdragon 835 with a standard issue, unoptimized build of Android. Scrolling and screen transitions can drop below 60 FPS at times, and the phone never feels as fast as something like the Pixel 2. Overall, it's fine. It's a standard janky Android loadout, but it can't compete with the best out there. Camera. The camera layout looks just like every other LG phone from the last few years, a dual camera setup with one main lens and one wide-angle lens. LG is making a big deal about the f1.6 aperture of the main camera lens, which is the largest ever put in a smartphone. A high-aperture lens should allow the camera to capture more light, which should theoretically allow it to do better in low-light situations. LG didn't go all out in the camera department, though. The company paired its high-aperture lens with a small camera sensor. The main v30 sensor has a 1.0 micrometers pixel size, which is much smaller than the 1.4 micrometers pixel size of a Pixel 2 or Galaxy S8 camera. The smaller pixel size means the v30 sensor can't capture as much light. We've got a combo of a theoretically good lens with a cheap to low-quality sensor. The result is a bad camera that can't hold a candle to the current Android champ, the Pixel 2. In fact, the v30's camera somehow seems worse than the LG G6 camera, released earlier this year. The low-light performance is pretty bad. You'd expect it to lose to the Pixel 2, but it also doesn't capture as much light as the LG G6. Pictures are often oversaturated and generally have a muddy look that lacks detail. Here the v30 is doing a lot of processing and making My Little Ginseng Tree look like a cartoon. The leaves aren't that green, and everything has a red tint to it. The Pixel 2 uses more realistic colors, and gets the white balance right. There's also a lot more detail in things like the leaves. The LG G6 is a grainy, mushy mess. All the detail is gone. The v30's overhyped f1.6 aperture lens is supposed to let in more light, but in this low-light shot, you don't see that in the end product. The Pixel 2 is way brighter. The LG G6 actually does better here than the v30. Again, the v30 enters Toontown with this hyper-pink rendition of a flower. It's also a grainy, blurry mess, and this is the best of several shots. The Pixel 2 brings detail and accurate colors. Again, the LG G6 actually does a better job than the v30. If I wanted a skinned Android phone, I'd still buy a Samsung. In the past, LG has always felt like the Me Too manufacturer of the Android world. If you're in the market for a skinned Android device, Samsung and LG are usually doing about the same things. They both have glass backs, and they're both using heavily skinned operating systems that are slow to get updates. But Samsung is the one out there blazing a trail toward a crazy new hardware feature, spending bucket loads of ad money, and getting top billing in carrier stores. LG usually feels like it's struggling to keep up. With the v30, LG's strategy of a no-nonsense phone seems really appealing. I like the general design of the v30 hardware more than the Galaxy S8, but Samsung only really messed up the fingerprint reader this year, while LG is shipping a bad display and a bad camera. Even if LG was shipping a better product than Samsung, I still think it would struggle due to Samsung's massive advertising and carrier deals. This isn't the case at any rate. LG's software is a complete disaster. It adds no appreciable features, it makes the whole phone ugly and inconsistent, and thanks to LG's Apple envy, the general copycat design makes this $800 feel like a cheap knockoff. It causes LG more work now and every time there's an update, and the company be way better off just killing the whole project and shipping stock Android. A crappy Android skin isn't differentiation when everyone is shipping a crappy Android skin, and LG would have a big leg up in the market and a lot more attention if it shipped straight AOSP with fast updates. Right now, with LG following basically the same path as Samsung, there's not much difference between the two devices. Do you want Samsung's better screen and camera, or LG's better fingerprint reader? The good LG's general hardware design looks good. The bezels are super slim, and there's no ugly logos on the front. It's got a headphone jack, a well-placed, accurate rear fingerprint sensor. A micro SD port and IPX8 water resistance are worthwhile extras. The bad LG's grainy OLED screen strikes again. You won't have as nice of a picture as you'd get with an LCD or Samsung OLED. The software is an ugly iOS copycat that makes the whole phone feel like a knockoff. The slow update program means you'll always be a version behind the current Android release. A glass back means the phone is very fragile. The ugly the camera. Why hyped up the f1.6 aperture lens and then pair it with a cheap camera sensor?